Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we conclude our year for 2024 with a 5-day program honoring literature, and in particular, writings that seek to right the world. This is particularly gratifying for me as a professor and recovering intellectual who has loved to read since he was a little boy and continues to read as voraciously as he possibly can in a world in which reading is a pretty radically diminished pastime and exercise, giving way to videos and audio books and so forth. But we thought as a holiday treat, we would celebrate writing in the last week before we adjourn for the holidays, and we'll be resuming on January 6th. One of the things I did after I became president of Ubiquity University, just because I love to teach and I love things of interest, is I started a course called Great Books, which is a required course for all of our graduate students to immerse themselves in 6 great books a year, one seminar per month, each book over 2 months. It's a wonderful, wonderful course. The students love it, and I enjoy teaching it. And I thought as we begin our 5-day program, I would offer my reflections as to what constitutes a great book. You know, there's millions of books out there, but only a handful are considered great. Just like there's been hundreds, thousands of monarchs, kings, and queens throughout history. But again, only a handful earned the accolade, the great. So what constitutes a great work? What constitutes a great book? I think a great book has 3 essential characteristics. Number one, common to all great books, East and West, North and South, modern or classic, is that they take up themes of gravitas. They take up noble themes that challenge the human mind, that challenge our sense of morality, themes that, secondly, speak to people across culture and across time. A book written in ancient China can speak to people today in California or Europe or down in Argentina or India. So a great book not only takes on the deep issues of human concern, they're universal issues. So people in far-off lands and far-off times can resonate with a great book. And thirdly, and perhaps most mysteriously and profoundly, great books change lives. It's a compelling thing to take in that the written word has as much power as an army in action, an avatar teaching. Just think of how many people have been affected fundamentally by just reading the Bible or reading the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao Te Ching. When one encounters a great work of literature, one encounters an intelligence not one's own. And so the interactivity between the reader and the read is something that's alive. It's something that is transformational. And it's something that can be communicated to anybody anywhere in the world who's moved by noble themes and deep purposes. And I would say in our world today, given the precariousness of human civilization as we teeter on the precipice of self-destruction, books that seek to right the world, books that seek to challenge the conscience, books that seek to change the world and people and cultures in a more abundant way, in my view, are great books. So it was some time ago that I met Jennifer Browdy, who's the publisher of the Green Fire Press, and we got to talking, and we came up with the idea, what about doing a whole 5-day program with some of her more seminal authors? So this week, Jennifer, each day, is going to introduce to us one of her authors, and they'll make a presentation, and then I'll circle back after they're concluded for a dialogue for our balance of the time. So Jennifer, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you. With many thanks. You're one of the few people that still publish books.
Yes. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I have to say that not all 5 are Green Fire Press authors. 2 of the 5 are Green Fire Press authors, and they are all incredible writer activists. And I coined a term for the kind of activists they are, which is world rights. So playwrights write plays, and world rights write to write the world, write to make the world better. So this week, I am so thrilled, really, to be introducing 5 of my favorite world rights to the Humanity Rising audience. And it's a special pleasure to start with Maria Sirois, today's guest, who is a positive psychologist, and I think is going to start us off on a positive note, which we need these days. You know, we have to be honest about the challenging times we're living in, and realize that we don't have control over external circumstances, but we have some control over how we respond and how we work with our own consciousness to become more resilient. So let me introduce Maria, and then we'll get into it. Maria Sirois has spent more than 3 decades in the boardrooms of business, at the bedsides of the dying, and everywhere in between, doing one thing: offering the data, stories, tools, and perspectives that enable us to cultivate resilience, health, wisdom, and a greater capacity to lead ourselves and others well, no matter the strain or the suffering of the moment. So this is really important work that she's been doing, and she's shared it with us so generously in these books that we're going to discuss. She's the author of 2 books: A Short Course in Happiness After Loss and Other Dark, Difficult Times, which was her first Green Fire Press book, and Every Day Counts. And her 3rd book, The Generous Exchange, which is forthcoming in 2025, is a collection of essays reflecting on the benefits of appreciating beauty, goodness, and excellence. And those are themes that we're going to be coming back to a lot today. So I thought we might just start, Maria, with you talking to us about why it's so important to focus on goodness, beauty, and excellence as we try to work through our personal and collective grief over these times.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Jennifer. You know, so much is overwhelming and so much is painful personally and universally. And it behooves us and it forces us to figure out ways in which to restore ourselves. And it turns out that when we attend to beauty, whether it's natural beauty or inner beauty, goodness, and or if we attend to excellence in the world, whether it's excellence in writing, excellence in design, excellence in kindness, for example, we feel restored. There's a sense of physical vitality that we often can tap back into. There's a sense of cognitive respite. We relax, we calm down. But paradoxically, we also tend to feel inspired in the presence of beauty or goodness or excellence. And the combination of restoration, inspiration, and that sense of vitality increasing is what enables us to wake up and live another day and bring forward the better parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I'm interested in the book, how you blend.
I'll keep talking a little bit in the book for a second. And this is just a perfect example, right? There are moments of the smaller assaults and insults of life, and of course, the larger ones of violence and injustice and poverty and food insecurity. And in the presence of darkness, we know that throughout history, humanity has struggled to find a way to sort of right itself as individuals in order to right the larger systems. What's kind of gorgeous about any practices, and I'd be curious if y'all would put in the chat any practices you might have about attending to beauty, whether it's inner beauty or natural beauty, practices that have served you. When we do so, it also at the exact same time connects us to that which is larger than ourselves. We feel more, less alone in life, less exiled, less abandonment when we are paying attention to the natural kingdoms, when you actually hear the bird song, or when you notice the fox crossing the path, or when those of us who live in cityscapes, when that seed that you planted in your little plant pot on the windowsill, when that seed begins to grow, there is something about that sense that we are less alone and more important, not important from the ego perspective, but more important in terms of stewarding the systems of our lives forward, that creates that sense of mattering. So there's also kind of meaning in this attention, in this appreciation of beauty that is so, so important. Yeah, Rita, thank you. Walking in groves of trees, 1,000% yes. I happen to live near the mountains, and those regular walks up into the hills, into the mountains, have been incredibly sustaining. Jennifer, I'm checking in to see if you're.
Yeah, I have quiet for the moment, but I'm afraid the smoke alarm is randomly going off. Sorry about that. And I'll just, if I have to mute quickly, I will. But in the meantime, let's seize the moment. So you in this new book, and in all of your books, you share a lot of personal stories. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the value of sharing stories from your life, and sometimes very vulnerable ones. Why you have decided to do that as a writer, and how that might contribute to writing the world, sharing your own stories.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with that sense of connectedness and the invitation to offer, one's history as an example of what's possible, and also to offer one's history as an example of not being the expert in something. When I enable myself to share those moments of grief or despair or confusion or just downright crazy town, then I'm choosing to honor and acknowledge that, there is a certain set of knowledge here, and an incredible being of questions and seeking and longing, like all of us. And so it's partly my personal longing to feel connected to those who read what I've written, my longing to be not separate from the larger conversations that are so important. And also, just now, if I may for a moment, move to the psychology world. Growth can only happen when we acknowledge that which has been broken or faulted or fractured, and acknowledge also the longing to sort of bring wholeness back together. And so there is no resilience, there is no increasing sustained vitality, there is no capacity to right the world in the ways that are organic to you or to any one of us until we acknowledge the broken parts. And so I do think there is an integrity in choosing to consider the possibility that one's history is informative and creates a community of conversation that can move any dialogue forward. In this case, the dialogue of restoring our planet and our species and our connection to each other.
Yeah, that is what I have seen as the value of purposeful memoir. Purposeful in that sense of sharing your story in order to be a benefit to others. And, you know, despite the super interconnection of social media, we're still quite alienated, many of us, right? We have the sense that we're alone in our experience. And so people will share very quickly on social media, but what you are doing in your book is more of a sustained inquiry. And I think it's really valuable. There's in both the first book and this book, I just want to slow down and really slow down with you and read one chapter at a time and just let that resonate. You know, it's not the kind of book that you want to rush through at all. Each story you tell is so resonant. Like there's just so much in it. So I really appreciate it. And I think you wrote it fairly slowly too, right?
Oh, Lord, yes. I was in 2015, I was doing a seminar in California. And as a gift to the audience and to the speakers, the organizers gave us each a brass medallion, and we were invited to choose a word to put on the medallion, and it was strung on a necklace chain. And I just in that seminar had started, you know, scribbling about the notion of beauty, and I had the word beauty stamped. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I actually mindfully began to think about what is this longing to write about beauty? And it was connected directly to my sense of overwhelming despair that happened by the time December 2020 had come around. And discovering that, you know, while I wanted to hide under the covers in my bed, because there was so much grief, so much sorrow, so much loss, so much pressure, so much confusion, that getting out and walking into the mountains every day as a daily practice brought me back to life. And so I began to consider, oh, what if we don't look at beauty in the big abstract, but beauty as an element of our coexistence here that is always here available to us, just as inner beauty is always here available to us.
Yes. And this, you know, beauty is one of those things that may sometimes seem like a luxury. Like, you know, who has time for beauty, or it's self-indulgent, like you put your makeup on and it's vanity, right? So I think you're talking about a very different kind of beauty. You want to say more about that? Like what is the beauty that you're trying to point us towards?
So here I'm thinking about beauty as that which is precious, which may have an external appearance that is pleasing, right? Just as the lily or the peony might be aesthetically pleasing. Michelangelo's statue, aesthetically pleasing. But it's the essence of preciousness that actually makes beauty sustaining and nourishing and inspiring. There's a gorgeous paradox in looking at both moral beauty and external beauty, as well as excellence, which is they are fragile. They are impermanent. Consciously or unconsciously, we understand that which we are paying attention to and appreciating will fade. It will, our influence. And Jim began talking about the great books. There are great works of literature that have lasted for centuries, right? Rare. That is rare. Most of us, the impact we have and that which we see will fade over time. And it is that exact sort of sweetness, poignancy, bittersweetness is the better word, that compels us often to attend to it. And then more importantly, and I think, and I was reading the chat in terms of the walks and the gazing and this looking up to the stars or looking out. More importantly, what we've uncovered and why the book began to feel urgent, not just pleasurable, but urgent, is that we have discovered in the field of positive psychology that when you increase your practice of gratitude toward any one of those pathways, external beauty, inner beauty, or excellence, it actually triggers pro-environmental behavior. We protect that which inspires us and that which we find beautiful. So if we want to continue to raise generations of human beings across the globe who are doing what they can to sustain some part of our existence, our coexistence with the natural kingdoms, then this is not a bad idea to up-level this strength.
So I talk a lot about aligning the personal, political, and planetary. And by political, I mean the collective, the social. And most people will focus in on one of those areas. Like you'll have environmentalists who are all about the environment and the planet, but don't really think about the personal enough, you know? I think you really need to go from each person's heart straight out to the heart of the planet, if I can say it that way, you know, and create this alignment. And so, yeah, we won't be moved to save what we don't love. So a lot of this is about cultivating love. I think love for self, love for others, love for the planet. And it seems to me that your practice of appreciating excellence, beauty, and goodness is partly about remembering how to love ourselves as individuals and as a species. Like we are pretty hard on ourselves. Those of us who are aware of the destructive side, the dark side of humanity, can be really hard on ourselves. And there's a lot of guilt and shame and, sadness and grief. So I think part of what you're doing is providing another side. Like there's another story here that needs to be told. And that's what you're foregrounding.
Oh, thank you for that, Jennifer. I'm reminded of a conversation, Kelly McGonigal, who is a brilliant positive psychologist, health psychologist at Stanford, when asked about how do we possibly take on the environment, the world, climate change. And she said something, very direct, which is we need to do the small things like in this past year, I've stopped purchasing paper napkins. I just don't use paper napkins. I use cloth napkins and I make people reuse them over and over and over again until I wash them, right? So small step, right? But also, the medium steps like choosing consciously how often you travel with gas-powered vehicles, for example, to the larger steps like voting and protesting and writing letters, right? And that we need to be able to participate in the entire spectrum of activity to the best extent we can. Now, to go back to your heart, which I love what you said about the personal heart being connected to the larger hearts of the world and of each other. Our hearts beat 50 million times as fetuses before we even take a breath. Our hearts are profoundly capable of holding us steady in the presence of the challenge of great change. As an organ, they are remarkably resilient. What they require, however, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, is a willingness to be vulnerable as well as brave. A willingness to allow the tender pain of recognizing, oh my Lord, we are losing another species, with side by side with the tender hope of, oh my God, we have rejuvenated and reinvigorated a species yet again. Can we possibly hold both the brokenness and the whole at the same time? We are magnificent as human beings in our ability to navigate both brokenness and wholeness at the same time. My work in psychology over 30 years has been, to join the conversation of psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists who have helped us understand humanity is remarkably capable of adaptation in healthful directions. And to go back to your first question, to reinvigorate that capability, it behooves us to actually create moments of presence in which we are present to that which nourishes us. I've come to think of beauty and goodness and excellence as nutritive. I don't even know if that's a word, nutritious, nourishing, that they literally feed every part of the being.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about one of my absolute favorite passages in your book is about the David in Italy. I would
Yeah.
just love you to share, because there's so many different kinds of beauty, and that one seems to be especially poignant in this context.
So I was struck by an article I read in the New York Times numbers of years ago about the fragility of the David. The David's ankles have fractures in them, the statue itself. And so it is at risk. And the guardians of the statue and at the academia have done everything they can to protect from earthquakes, which is a major consideration, but also, vandalism and, to protect this beautiful piece of art. What is remarkable to understand is that that block of marble, began as an ugly, misshapen, huge block of marble that the villagers nicknamed the Giant because it sat in the middle of their village for years before the right sculptor was found to create the right piece of art from that block. To me, it speaks to this gorgeous integration of that which is misshapen or misunderstood or at the wrong place at the wrong time, until suddenly it is seen anew by a new set of lenses. And I connect that in my own mind to the work, for example, of data scientists. What is her name? I have it written down. Hannah Ritchie. I didn't want to forget her, from Scotland, who teaches at Oxford, who's suggesting that this generation, this younger generation, is actually the first generation of sustainable participants in the world, not the last. They are the first, because what is happening in the millennials and younger is a consciousness and awareness that actually moves them above the needle of where our generation and our grandparents' generation were in terms of sustainability. The David, as a physical manifestation of what is possible in terms of beauty, is just awe-inspiring. As an example of excellence, what we know is that in the presence of excellence, sometimes we feel jealous, like, I'll never be that good in the field that I've determined to be my field, whether it's sculpting or writing or marathon running, right? I'll never be a Michelangelo. But also often next side by side, again, with that jealousy, is a sense of wait. If I practice as hard and as long and put the effort in as Michelangelo did, perhaps I can come close to achieving the highest parts of myself in the areas that are impassioning for me. So many beautiful connections in that. And my Lord, I love what you all are sharing in the chat in terms of practices, in terms of attention, the poetry. It has become beauty again. With beauty above me, I walk. It has become beauty again. Imagine how we might feel. Oh, Jennifer, I had a thought this morning. Imagine how we might feel, you all, if we just spent a minute every single day during this holiday season, whatever the holiday connections you all have, just spend a minute attending to inner beauty and outer beauty or excellence, how it might change how we approach. Might it be possible that it would be enough to bring ourselves as we are to the Hanukkah table, the Christmas table, the Kwanzaa table, the New Year conversation? If we bring ourselves with our eyes softened to beauty, might we then actually see beauty in the drama or in what is missing as well as what is present?
Yeah. And so the thing, just to come back to Michelangelo a minute,
Mm.
the other thing about that example is, how long it took him to create
Yeah.
David. And when we think about, I think we're a culture now that values speed and instant results and solutions, all of that. And I think another thing that your book is pointing us towards is is perseverance and slowing down and recognizing that you might not have an instant result. It's not like popping a pill. Like psychology done well is not like popping a pill. It takes time. And that we can maybe appreciate the goodness, beauty, and excellence in taking that time. Like that's part of what is beautiful, is that we slow down, and maybe in the holiday season, slowing down to appreciate just, one candle flame and how beautiful that is. And that's enough.
Right. Right. Yes, it's the Thich Nhat Hanh presence, when you're washing a dish, could you possibly please wash the dish, and appreciate the fact that you have water and you have something that were able to enjoy food with, and you have time to clean something and perhaps return it to a slightly better state, right? And so here we are centering on this notion of presence that, we cannot heal what we don't acknowledge, and we cannot move that acknowledgement forward until we are present long enough to what needs to be attended to as the next best step. And so this notion of presence in terms of healing our relationship to the world or to ourselves is absolutely vital. Appreciation is a present-based practice. It requires us to be sort of still enough in the moment to notice. I happen to be blessed enough in this moment. That's not a word I use publicly very often, but it is a word I feel in my bones almost daily. I feel blessed enough to be in the presence of some Colorado mountains today. And it's a gray sky, and, the landscape is kind of brown. There's no radiant greens or yellows from the fall or gold here in this moment. And yet you can see how everywhere I look now, trees are stretching toward the sky. Annie Dillard said, beauty is present everywhere. Could we just pay attention? Could we just simply notice, right? So I do hope that if people choose to read this work or any work that inspires them along this line, that we take it slowly, that we absorb it, let it inform the marrow of our being, and see where it takes us.
So one of the things you do in the book is you provide all these inspiring role models. I mean, become a role model as an author yourself. You're doing this work. And then you're also giving us lots of places to look to for inspiration and sort of stimulation, right? So are there some that you'd like to bring forward today? Some of your role models?
Well, I think, Robin Wall Kimmerer, botanist, activist, indigenous wisdom keeper, and storyteller, is just a remarkable example of how, we don't have to have one thing on our business card. We can bring all of ourselves to the conversations that we're having. The woman who tends the strawberry patch and writes about the reciprocal exchange of generosity from the strawberry to us. And then as she returns the gift of the strawberry to her father for his birthday, that beautiful reciprocal appreciation and exchange, and then seeds the strawberry plants again, not being careful about how many to take and when to take them and so on. She's certainly inspiring. I mentioned Hannah Ritchie, young data scientist from Scotland, who has a gorgeous bit of work on what is also true, right? The data is terrifying, and the data is also positive and invigorating. And can we hold both sets of data at the same time? Toni Morrison, as a writer, the first time I read the first book that came to me from her work was Beloved, and I just about passed out from awe, and inhaled it, and then remembered, watching a conversation that she was having with a kind of an interviewer in the line of Bill Moyer. It wasn't Bill Moyer, who asked her how she could write about such big topics such as enslavement, and then choosing to her main character chose to murder her children because they had fled into freedom instead of having them be at risk from being enslaved again. And Toni Morrison said, The world is that big. Life is that big. Life is big enough to hold all of our stories. And that was, I think, the first permission I understood, that as a writer or a storyteller or a poet or a prayer keeper, you know, it isn't necessary to be Toni Morrison. It is necessary to share who we are and what we have.
And that, I think the title of your book comes from or is influenced by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Influenced by her conversations about the reciprocal exchange that we are invited always to have with the plant kingdoms and the bird kingdoms and the land itself and the waters and the skies.
Yeah, who really ask not much in exchange, right? I mean, they're so generous. So your book is a generous exchange. And maybe there's an invitation to human beings to become more generous ourselves, recognize the abundance and the generosity of nature.
You know, and here's again where the data is fascinating. We've known for decades that if you put yourself in the presence of beauty, however you define beauty, it softens our hearts. And we tend to be kinder in the next moments to the next people we see. So if I've infused myself with appreciation for the sunrise or the trees or the stars at night, and, you know, the phone call comes in or the text comes in, or I'm at, you know, out, you know, at Stop and Shop or Starbucks, or I'm kinder to the next people I see. So it becomes this exchange of generosity that is quite fluid, quite organic. We don't have to force it. We simply have to choose to participate in it.
So you also write about how small acts of kindness are really important, and small acts of goodness, you know, any little step that we make in that direction counts. Yeah.
One of the conversations the folk in my decade are having, I'm in my 60s, my mid 60s, and a lot of us think about legacy, like what have we created? What will be sustained after we're gone, if anything, right? I live in a small town. I grew up in a factory town. I'm not Robin Wall Kimmerer. I'm not Michelangelo. Let's just start there. So what might be my legacy? And one of the decisions I made when I turned 60 was to plant my flag in a value. And I decided to plant my flag in the value of kindness. If I could do nothing else, at least I could consciously choose to continue to be kind as best I can. Not every minute of every day. Lord knows my kids might be rolling their eyes right now, but kind as much as I can. And choosing a value, generosity, kindness, compassion, care, creativity, choosing, a life-giving, a life-affirming value and planting your flag there is one of the most gorgeous ways to create a sustaining legacy. And being brave enough to share that out loud so that it's not just a secret within your soul, but to actually say, well, I'm choosing not to enter that pickleball competition because it triggers too much of my competitive nature, and I'm not kind, and I don't like that about myself in that environment. To say out loud, I'm choosing to live into this value. I'm choosing to live into sustainability, or into the value of sharing words and the value of the imagination for writers, right? It not only centers and grounds us, it creates a sense of mattering, that our days matter, our lives matter, because I know who I am, or I know at least a part about who I am, but it also can inspire that in another human being.
And it's a very different approach than comparing ourselves, right? Because legacy, as you said, it has a lot to do with, it often has a lot to do with, well, how do my assets compare to other people's assets? Whether however you define the assets. And yeah, I think that's such a damaging part of capitalism and competitiveness that has seeped into our consciousness, and that we just need to get rid of. Yeah.
One of the great anxieties I carry as a psychologist are the high levels of depression and anxiety in our younger generations. And we know that some of that is connected directly to negative social comparison, right? Seeing someone else's lives on social media as if their lives are perfect and lovely and easeful and amazing and astonishing. And, oh my God, the fallacy of those conversations is disheartening. And there is something called upward social comparison, where we choose to hold in our mind's eye are the exemplars. I'd love for people in the chat, who are the exemplars in your lives? Who do you look to as evidences of excellence in the ways that are meaningful to you? Let's just remind ourselves of the incredible capacities that are out there. And Jen, I'd love to hear who your exemplars are in the writing world, because you devoted so much of your life to literature and writing. And when we do that, when we center ourselves on those who inspire us, Mia Hamm as a soccer player inspires me because she did not give up. Her capacity to persevere ties her directly to my Sicilian grandmother who did not give up, right? I need those role models. And so who is it who inspires you? That creates that sense of upward comparison. Like, they did that. Maybe I can do this, right? I love this. My cleaning lady is an exemplar. Anne Lamont, 1,000%. Sue, yes, also. Jennifer, who are your exemplars? Who do you admire in the writing world?
Oh my goodness. Well, the 5 people that I'm talking to this week for sure. But I think a lot about the fleeting nature of fame. And a lot of writers, I mean, of course, all writers write to be heard and have something they feel that is valuable they want to share. But I really admire writers who write from their hearts because they can't not write. And they're not worried about likes and sales numbers. And,
Right.
they just really feel like they want to share what's in their hearts because it's valuable. And that is, for me, the definition of world rights and world writing is it doesn't have anything to do with, publication success in a conventional understanding. It's about seriously wanting to make the world better through your creative expression. And so that's what I admire so much about what you're doing. You didn't have to take all this time to write a book. You're busy, got a lot going on. But to do that and to put it out there in book form, to share it that way is such an act of generosity and caring and compassion for others. So I really value that in you, just to bring it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But so somebody who always bounces to mind for me as an example, who might even be on Jim's great books list, is Virginia Woolf. She's one of my all-time favorite writers. I did my BA thesis on her and read everything by her when I was like 18 years old, which was quite an experience. And she suffered tremendously with mental health, so there's also this sense that we do it anyway. We show up anyway, no matter what the challenges are, and put word after word. I think is it Margaret Atwood who said, "A word after word after word is power."
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I know you were writing this book during COVID, and it had to have been hard to actually get yourself to finish it, get over that finish line.
It was hard, mostly because of the voices in our heads that tell us, oh, this is crap. I'm going to have an audience of 2 and it's my children. It's because I force them to read it, kind of thing. Right. So it's the self-doubt that makes it hard. It's also, the willingness to put oneself in, reality. I mean, does the world need more printed books? ? Trees, paper, right? To face the complexities of writing today. Certainly I could have just published something online that was available. Perhaps that's better, perhaps not. so there was some of that wondering, but also, when the word beauty came to me in 2015, it came like one of the, that still small voice. Like it was an idea that felt so resonant in my body at the time that I didn't want to ignore it. So I stamped it on the necklace. And to me, that's an invitation from the universe. When that happens, it's not, it's a call has been sent. And can I have the courage enough to listen and see how that wants to be made available into the world? It's Martha Graham the great dance choreographer, talked about a quickening. There's a quickening. And when the quickening happens, do we choose to ignore it or do we choose to step up into it? And I chose to step up into it. And there were various moments where I had a ton of doubts. And for me, and I'll just speak very personally right now, if I don't listen to those still small voices, my soul hurts. So, some of it is protective as well, that I don't feel like I matter as much if I am just listening to other people's voices. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think we really need to learn to value these intuitive voices. I definitely get them too. Like everything I think of substance that I have ever done has been because I just listened to the call. Yeah. And I don't know if it's, one of the things that I am concerned about, as an educator who works with young people maybe spend so much time listening to external input that they're not as attuned to their own intuition. I don't know if you find that in your psychology practice.
I find it everywhere. Everywhere. We've gone from, monotasking to multitasking to never being able to sit still long enough to actually hear a conversation or participate in it thoughtfully. Not everybody, but many of us. And so here's again where this notion of practices of appreciation can remind us of the beauty of the present moment long enough to sit still, long enough to feel what we feel and hear what we hear and think what we think, and long enough to consider that maybe I am enough right now. Maybe this moment is just enough. And so I don't have to buy the new iPhone, the larger TV, the new car. At least here in America, that's a compulsion that we seem to be fighting against culturally.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat to think we'll go to your questions very shortly. I just want to give some time because there's a whole beautiful last section of the book that's about practices, and I really would like to talk about the different kinds of practices that you're offering people.
And I haven't, in the writing I've done in the past, I've never spent time articulating, specific daily or weekly pragmatic practices, but it occurred to me that people might wonder, how can I do this? How can I participate more fully? Because gratitude is one of those things, appreciation is one of those things that can get banal. If we do the same 3 things I'm grateful for every night in our journal, after a while, many of us find that too sort of repetitive. And so challenge myself, and by the way, I'm seeing Sally Lee, challenge myself from an appreciative inquiry perspective to consider, well, what are the range of practices and the possible? And so I have suggestions for daily, weekly, micro practices, school-based practices for educators and staff and school systems for children. And they hit all 3 of the pathways. But what came to me as I stepped back and looked at that section was, there are practices of witnessing, essentially, sitting in the presence of and really witnessing and drinking in and allowing it to have those positive beneficial effects. There are practices of celebration of action, the journaling, that I do appreciation practice by texting, 30-day practice texting, because it takes 10 seconds, but the reward is really fast. And I'm already on the phone anyway, and I can bring in a lot of different people. So there's witnessing, there's action practices, which includes celebrating and sharing. And then there are becoming practices. What would it be like if you decided to become a little more of the inner beauty that you already are? Or if you decided to become a little more of the excellences that are already evident within you? What might that be like? How might it change the trajectory of your living?
So are you recommending people journal? Is that right? Turn to writing as a form?
Journaling, yes. Sharing stories, like, let me share with you a moment of beauty I had, like making coffee dates, share stories, texting, collaging. In school systems, I suggested, what if you had an essay experience where children got to share stories of the exemplars who move and motivate them, and then share those without the school system. So many possibilities, so many possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Does it feel like a good time to take some questions now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that, I don't know. People in the audience, do you want to put your questions in the chat? Is Jim?
Please do if you have a question.
There's
Well,
Jim.
normally I come back in around now.
Great.
I've been looking at some of the comments and questions. Before we start, I just want to take a moment, everyone, and wish Stan a happy birthday. This is Stan's birthday today, and he's one of our beloved supporters. And actually, I would call Stan a pillar of the Humanity Rising for all the work that he does, cataloging everything. So Stan, happy birthday. I want to then go to you, Maria. I was intrigued that you placed your trinity around goodness, beauty, and excellence. And Plato does it around goodness, beauty, and truth.
Mm.
I was very intrigued when you laid that out, why you chose excellence instead of, say, truth.
Yeah. I chose it for a very specific reason. In the world of positive psychology, there was a beautiful global study done in the early 2000s on the character strengths that are life-giving, that contribute to the thriving not only of individuals, of humanities. In this 3-year global study led by Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson from Penn, articulated 24 strengths that were not only seemed to be resonant for this time, but resonant throughout time, from the time of the Greeks, from indigenous people's writings from long ago, from artists, poets, philosophers, not just psychologists. And one of the character strengths that coheres together is this appreciation of beauty and excellence. So that is the central core of the book, this quality that we know exists throughout time across race, age, gender, identity, socioeconomic status, geography, and history. So I just stood on the platform that they created for us, Jim.
Well, good. You may probably know that for the Greeks, happiness was defined as the pursuit of excellence. And
Right.
So that's a very high virtue.
Yeah.
And so that was a very good answer. Thank you. And I'm sure that excellence, like beauty, is cross-cultural and cross-temporal.
Yes, it often is. Rita's asking how we define excellence. And Rita, I was challenged because excellence often is understood to be, the peak of achievement, right? And that is one definition. I also came to play around with the possibility that there is an excellence in sustaining life. And I include in there a chapter reflection on some women I know from Afghanistan who have come to be sheltered here in the United States because the Taliban has them on their hit list. And they have reminded me of the excellence of choosing to do what one can to keep one's lineage alive, that there is an excellence in this notion of sustaining life. So I just moved excellence as broadly as I possibly could to past simple achievement or trophy or gold star. Because I do think there is so much more that we gain when we allow ourselves to be informed by role models who have nothing to do with podiums.
Yeah. Barbara is putting in the chat that excellence is beauty.
Yeah.
And I think that's something also worth considering. Certainly, Aristotle, I think, would have concurred with that as you were just indicating, Maria, for the Greeks, excellence wasn't becoming the CEO of a company. It was manifesting a certain distillation of your character. And in that sense, that which is beautiful is excellent, and that which is excellent is beautiful. And what is beautiful and what is excellent is also good. It's true.
And that connects to that idea that I've been playing with, Jim, about what if we landed ourselves in a particular value, like the value of kindness or generosity or creativity or compassion or passion, and just considered how we might, move within ourselves toward our own sustained excellence in that domain, just as an exercise in character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was my next question, actually. I wanted to probe your choice of kindness. Stan, that we just celebrated his birthday, has also talked a lot about, random acts of kindness. And it feels to me that in our world where everything is dissociated, conflicted, chaotic, and seemingly polarized beyond reconciliation, simple acts of kindness, as I'm beginning to experience, maybe because I'm in Washington, D.C., and you don't see very much kindness in this town, becomes really a premium quality. It's kindness, I think, becomes unusually valuable when almost no kindness can be observed in the world. Why did you choose kindness?
Okay. I'm challenging myself to be more honest than I normally am. And I tend to be pretty out there. There are certain relationships in my sphere that I find very challenging and that often push me off the center of my own best self. I don't want to live like that. I have cousins, for example, who I know voted 180 degrees differently than I did. I don't want to be at the dinner table across from my cousins and not be able to enjoy the goodness of who they are, even though we disagree with each other politically. And I found that the only way to open up a dialogue that actually moves us forward is by being kind first. Because I tried the other things. I tried arguing. I tried fixing. I tried suggesting passive aggressively. I tried not talking. I've tried all, and so basically, I'm at my last resort here. But here's what else is interesting: kindness twins with generosity. This is the data from psychology. When we are kind or when we witness kindness, we tend to be more generous in return. Even the person who acts kind, the person who receives kindness, or the person who witnesses will be more generous in the next moment. So they twin together, kindness and generosity. Generosity is the quintessential life-sustaining value. When we are generous across species, across races, across identity, across geography, we sustain life. So if we want a prayer, a hope that our children's and the generations of whatever species you love, yellow warblers, red fox, caribou, if we want those generations to sustain, then we have to triple down on generosity. And being kind is the doorway. It's the gateway drug, if you will, to generosity.
Jennifer, what would you say to kindness and generosity? This is such a fertile notion. It's so generative, kindness and generosity. as a professor of literature, there must be dozens and dozens of examples in world literature of random acts of generosity and kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of a particular example out of the corpus of literature where it just distilled it in a particularly compelling way?
Oh gosh, you're calling on me without warning here. I don't know. I have trouble coming up with books like that. But what I was thinking about as you were talking was how kindness and generosity are contagious.
Mm-hmm.
They're very
Yes,
way.
yes.
So and human beings, we're such herd animals. So we learn by observing from, as toddlers, of course, as infants, but still as adults, we learn from what we see. And I do find, like, I grew up in Manhattan. It was a pretty harsh environment, really, for a little child. And one thing I learned really well was never to make eye contact. I don't remember anybody, explicitly telling me that, but it's something that I learned. And when, as a teenager, I moved to a small town for college. It took me years to unlearn that. It took me years to feel like, oh, it was okay to make eye contact with somebody coming in and out of the store. And then when I started spending a lot of time in Canada, I also was struck by, well, everybody's so friendly here, like people don't just make eye contact and smile. They actually say, how are you? Are you having a good day today? They go that extra mile of kindness. And so I think that it's really going to be true that if each of us could just contribute our little measure of kindness that can be observed by others, it's like a little molecule that will pass from one person to another. But the converse is also true. If we show up and we're kind of closed off and hostile and expecting trouble, as I was as a kid in New York in the 70s, that will be amplified. It's kind of like the law of attraction. There's really something to that, right? What we show up with gets amplified in the world. So this call to kindness and generosity, I think it's essential. Like, this is medicine that we need to be taking ourselves and sharing now.
And if I could, because I just want to also acknowledge that some of us listening to this, and we're just exhausted. We're tired of being the caregiver. We're tired of being responsible. We're tired of our accountability, etc. Kindness to oneself is generous and will create that sort of respite inside, through which we can then find again the capacity to be kind externally. So this is not just about, do I have to bake more cookies for my neighbors kind of thing. Like, kindness to oneself is absolutely crucial as well. We have to keep ourselves in the conversation.
Yeah. By the way, Crystal put in the chat the example of Jim and Huck in the novel Huck Finn.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Crystal, because as a little boy, when I read it, I was struck by the generosity between those two protagonists in the novel, when there was really no reason to be, but it just made the whole novel alive, because you knew at some level in the end it wasn't going to work out well, given the strictures of the slavery in the South and so forth and so on. So that's actually a beautiful example, Crystal. Thank you so much for that. And on this theme, I want to ask both of you again, starting with you, Maria, and you as a publisher, Jennifer, and as a professor of literature, if you had to pick, say, one or two of the books that you've read that had the most profound influence on you, what would they be? Because you both have read a lot of books, and what books would immediately stand out as transformational in your character?
Two come to mind immediately for me, and I could spend an hour with you on this, but three actually. Beloved, for the bravery
One
of
of the great, great books.
naming
Yeah,
what is true.
yeah.
Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, for her poetry, but also so I read that, I think in the early 80s, but it stayed with me in terms of the conversation about paying attention. I mean, she took a pond drop and analyzed what was happening in the pond drop and could connect that to philosophy, to spirituality, to humanity in the next paragraph. And I was like, that was, as a writer or someone who loves words, that was so awe-inspiring to me that, you can let go of certain formulas and just let your imagination take you, or your heart take you where it wants to take you. And then just on a very more personal note, Richard Russo, the novelist, grew up in the same factory town I grew up in, where teeth are kind of optional. And he did such a beautiful job, bringing to light these characters who are really pushing the edge of staying alive and find a way to, have a sense of humor about it all in this craziness. So he's a personal favorite in my heart.
Yeah. How about you, Jennifer?
Well, my field has been more nonfiction than fiction. So even in my doctoral thesis, I was more working with memoirs and testimonials. So Rigoberta Menchu's testimonial was really formative for me, because it took me into just extraordinary resilience and a little bit of her indigenous culture. She was careful about what she revealed, but I found that book really changed my consciousness around being from the heart of empire. It just woke me up. And around the same time, I also encountered Audre Lorde. So Audre Lorde has been really formative for me. Her book, Sister Outsider, I still assign with students now. She was important to me in the 90s as I was doing my dissertation, and she's still important. She's still out there in front. So that book. And then Gloria Anzaldúa. These are probably books that people aren't reading anymore, but she was a Chicana queer activist, avant la lettre. She was, again, out in front, trailblazing, and writing about how borders and polarities and oppositions need to be overcome. And boy, we could use her now. We need her now. And then more recently, somebody I could point to is Zainab Salbi. And maybe you all have heard of Zainab Salbi. She's an incredible Iraqi activist who's worked around the world on gender-based violence. But she wrote a book called Between Two Worlds, which was about growing up under Saddam Hussein. Her father was Saddam Hussein's personal pilot. And so they were a very privileged inner circle family. And yet she shows so beautifully the light and the dark side of that, and what it was like, how complicated it was. And she was, in danger of being preyed on herself by Saddam, and her mother got her out of there. And it was, just a terrible, tremendous story. But what I find uplifting about it is how she channeled, and all of these people I've just mentioned, how they channeled their personal struggles and pain and suffering into some kind of positive gift to the world. So they were super generous in that way. They weren't I think a lot of what we're talking about is really, what these books talk about is trauma. And there's a way in which you can just sort of sit in trauma, and that way doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the world. So I tend to look for inspirational stories, nonfiction stories that offer ways out, ways beyond, ways. This week, we're going to be talking about how we can move from where we are with all its darkness and struggle to a brighter place. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, as we start to bring this to a close, Maria, I would love to have you talk to us about the art form of writing. Many people feel that they can't sing and they can't write and they can't do any other things that are perfectly natural to do if there's the right kind of pathway toward the exercise. And I'm just wondering if you could tell your story of how you became a writer. How did writing come upon you such that you learned to love it and you've expressed yourself with it? And what tips would you give as a gifted writer for those who may not think that they have it in them to do so? It's such a beautiful art form.
Yes, thank you. I loved writing essays as a teenager, and somehow I got distracted away from that, thinking that I really had to have a much more pragmatic path forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sustain myself. And then in my later 30s, I had a baby, and my husband at the time, my ex-husband, became diagnosed with cancer. And it was all of it very overwhelming, because his cancer was caused by the environment at work. And so he could no longer do his specialty. And so he lost his work and his identity. And I'm trying to raise a little infant at the same time. And I needed a place of respite. And I chose to take a local writing class, an hour and a half a week out of my house, gave myself permission to get a babysitter, and found that there were stories living within me that wanted to be shared. That my writing teacher, I'll never forget the first class. I'd never taken a writing class before, and she had a bunch of objects on the table, and she asked us to describe an object, and everybody diligently picked the shell or the mat or the crystal and started, describing the object. And I started writing about a child who I had treated for in a pediatric cancer unit at Dana-Farber in my doctoral program, and telling the story of her bone leg amputation from bone cancer. And I was embarrassed. I said, I couldn't, these words just came out. And she said, yes, just yes. Any words that want to come out, just write them down. So that was my first lesson. Whatever is ready to be spoken, speak it. Doesn't matter. If you said, I'm going to write about, the sky, and all of a sudden you're writing about what happened to you in fourth grade, write about what happened in fourth grade. So that was my first lesson. And then I began to read writers on writing. Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird was my first purchased book on how to write. And then Annie Dillard's The Writing Life. And I went on from there and recognized that there were a couple of common practices that they all suggested. One is take it seriously enough to book time to write as if it was your job. So I didn't have a lot of time during that time of my life. I was working, raising an infant, managing my husband's cancer care. But I wrote on Tuesday and Friday mornings. I set aside 2 mornings, and I showed up every Tuesday and Friday morning at my local Juice and Java cafe. And there was a group of men who that was their morning time together. And so we nodded each other. They would do their chat. I would write. And then the third lesson that became absolutely life-sustaining was that when you hear, whatever it is you hear, that voice, just stop and listen, right? Just pay attention to the voice from inside. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to dwell on this last one, because I think that is a very profound awareness that many people attribute to something coming through us from the outside in. And that if you don't catch it while it's passing through, you lose it. It may even go to someone else. And as you may know, there's a growing body of exploration and evidence and work that's indicating that ideas and even emotions are not our own.
Yeah.
But are some kind of interactivity between us and exterior cosmic rays, or what's emanating from the sun flares, the moon's getting full moon and different things like that. So I'd love to have you just dwell on this delectable last little nugget you dropped about you got to catch it when it's there, and it may just move on.
So a few things come to mind. I'm very well aware of the science of invention, ingenuity, that an idea for printing pops up here at the same time it pops up over there, or an idea for maybe we could build an irrigation system there, pops up over here. So ingenuity seems to have been part of a larger shared experience. So knowing that, and now knowing and appreciating more and more the interconnectedness of natural systems, the fungi informing the root systems, which informs the growth of the trees, which informs how they support each other and sustain other species in their environment, and so on. It doesn't seem too far-fetched to consider that thought is not contained to the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that we've known for a long time that emotion is not contained to the body, that it is experienced systemically, it is shared contagiously. And so, giving room inside oneself to consider that an idea has been, finding, what was it Rumi said, what you seek is seeking you, right? So I'm seeking inspiration and a sense of mattering and significance. I have an idea about beauty. I take it seriously enough to land it on a necklace, which I'll wear, by the way, the day we have our book launch, Jennifer. And then take it seriously enough to sit in the presence of beauty and wonder, oh, this idea, let's see where it goes. I also, however, want to give permission. So Tom Waits tells this great story about he'll be driving on an LA freeway, and an idea for a line, a lyric will come to him, and it's like, shit, I can't pull off that. There's nowhere to put it now, and he's afraid that if he calls somebody and shares the line so they write it down for him, he'll have lost the energy of it. So he's like totally trapped, and he's like rushing suddenly to get home so he can write down the idea or the line, whatever. And sometimes he can, sometimes the muse stays with him, and sometimes it's lost. Yeah. What I want to suggest is it isn't lost. It's energetically bent, seeking a home somewhere else. And if we can stop thinking of ourselves just as individuals with individual goals and dreams and longings, and consider that, okay, as beauty is coming to me, perhaps it's coming to a 16-year-old, girl who's sitting down to write an essay somewhere in Zambia, that, okay, we're in the conversation, and maybe it lands here, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's gifted to you. It's okay. It's okay. So permission both to hold on to what has come to you and take it seriously and allow yourselves to be serious in it, and permission to know that not every idea can be fully invested in, because we also have to, make bread and draw water.
Yeah. You got to stay on the freeway.
You got to drive the
car. Well, thank you so much. And Jennifer, if you want to make any comment, I'm just thinking, as both know, the Greeks and the Romans felt that even genius was not something indigenous to a really smart guy like Einstein, but a genius was a visitation of the gods. And when it was sort of finished with you, it could move on. And so I really appreciate you making this final point, Maria. It's a very rich one to consider as we ponder creativity.
Yes.
Yes.
In our lives. And
I appreciate that you picked it up so readily, Jim, because a lot of people won't. A lot of people will shy away from that idea of a transpersonal consciousness that we can all tap into. But I happen to believe in it very strongly. And I think I know you and I am very interested in dreams as the dream world as a place where we go to experience that transpersonal consciousness freely. And I think creative people pull down that dream stuff, and we bring it into the waking hours, and we often capture it on paper if we can. And I do think that there are muses that are speaking through us. I don't know, can't define those exactly, but I feel them, and I feel them when they come through me. And it's a really good feeling, it's a positive feeling. So one of the things that I would love to see more, again, another one of my big passions is education and transforming the educational system, which is why I love Ubiquity University. I would love to see children being encouraged to honor their innate creativity and continue to cultivate it rather than having it snuffed out of them. So that's another whole conversation. Yeah. But I think the more, the internet, it's sort of a prosthesis, right, for our transpersonal consciousness, but it is kind of externalizing it for us and helping us to see and to connect with people around the world and to see how ideas travel and reverberate, and how you can have a little seed of an idea that somebody else will pick up and grow into a beautiful tree, and how we're all doing that all the time. I think we do it with the internet, but we also do it just in our own consciousness.
Totally. We have a big course coming up in January on remote viewing by one of the world's leading remote viewers, with a specific intent to communicate with extraterrestrials. And, one of the things that they're finding out about the extraterrestrials is that some of them come in from other star systems, but some of them come in from other dimensions. And as they pass through, some people can see them and some people can't. That there's this peculiar relationship, say for you, Maria, as a writer, where the same thought would go through other people. Back to your point about, the zeitgeist, it comes up in zeitgeist. And so why was it Maria that picked it up and wrote the bestseller? And the guy right sitting on the bus right across the way might have had a passing thought about it, but wasn't curious enough or wasn't aware enough to catch it. And then I think that's the mark of a truly great writer, is that you're willing to catch it and then wrestle with it and then form it through your own categories of cognition and emotion and intuitive sense of reality to express it in your own way. And that combination, I think, is what speaks to people across time. Anyway, just a final little thought. So, Jennifer, why don't you tee us up for tomorrow, and then we'll adjourn to the after chat.
Okay, so tomorrow we are going to be speaking with Nina Simons, who is author of Nature, Culture, and the Sacred. Woman Listens for Leadership. And Nina is best known as the co-founder of the Bioneers Conference, which has been going on for more than 30 years in California. And I highly recommend that conference. It's very inspiring. And she's also an incredible writer and leadership coach who has a different idea of leadership than most people. She's talking about something she calls full spectrum leadership. So we'll explore that, and also her idea of sacred activism. Nina's somebody who really thinks outside the box, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation tomorrow and all week. Wonderful set of interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Nina. She's a great soul. She is totally out of the box.
Yes.
Maria, thank you so much. So much. I've learned a lot today, and so honor and respect your artistic form. I love this notion of goodness, beauty, and excellence. I think you've improved on Plato.
Oh, Lord. Thank you all. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience for your bringing yourselves so powerfully presently to this moment. I'm very honored. And Jennifer, thank you for inviting me here in this conversation. It means the world to me. Jim, for all you do, Stan and George behind the scenes, may beauty and kindness come your way.
Thank you,
Thank
Lisa. And yeah, you can now join Maria, who's going to stay for a few minutes in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You receive the link in the Zoom reminder for today, those of you who are regulars. And we'll see you all tomorrow for the second convening of Writing to Write the World.